A small village. Dromineer, County Tipperary, Ireland. Population, a few hundred people. No internet access, no startup culture, no Silicon Valley mentors knocking on the door. Just rolling green hills, a lake, and two brothers, Patrick and John Collison, who taught themselves to code. Patrick took his first computer course at age 8 at the University of Limerick because there was nothing else available in Dromineer. At 10, he was writing programs. At 16, he won Ireland's Young Scientist of the Year. Not for a volcano model, for building an artificial intelligence system in Lisp, a programming language most adults had never heard of. Most people would frame this story as a story about payments. It is not. It is a story about what happens when someone who grew up with nothing decides to remove friction from the entire world. No connections, no internet, no resources, just a problem, and the refusal to accept it. Theory is everywhere. Experience is rare. Welcome to WowFlow. We are here to close the experience gap, to transfer lived experience from humans to machines and the generations that follow. If you do not believe in the power of real experience, stop watching. This is not for you. But if you do, let's begin. Year 2009. Online payments are controlled by giants, banks, payment processors, and one dominant platform, PayPal. If you want to accept payments, you use them. You do not question it. You accept the friction. Weeks of paperwork. Merchant account applications that feel like applying for a mortgage, complex APIs, unclear documentation, broken integrations, hidden fees, gateway fees, PCI compliance fees, failed transaction fees, international card fees, every layer stacked on top of the previous one. And here's the thing almost nobody talks about. This was not an accident. The established players had no incentive to make it easier. Complexity created lock-in. Complexity justified fees. Complexity kept competitors out. Developers suffered in silence. Founders adapted. Most of them assumed the problem could not be solved. They were wrong. Before Stripe, Patrick Collison was already a millionaire. At 19. In 2007, he and his younger brother John, who was 17, built a company called Octomatic, a platform for eBay sellers. They got into Y Combinator. They merged with 2 Oxford graduates, and 11 months later, they sold the company for $5 million. Patrick became director of engineering at a Canadian public company. John went back to Ireland, scored the highest leaving certificate result in Irish history, then enrolled at Harvard. Teen millionaires from a small Irish village. And yet, neither of them had any idea how the financial industry actually worked. Zero. No banking background. No fintech experience. No relationships with payment processors. They just knew one thing. Accepting payments online was painful, and nobody was fixing it. In late 2009, the idea came to Patrick while working on side projects. He had been building small software products, charging users, hitting the same wall every time. The payment integration was broken. And then, one evening, after attending a startup event at Berkeley, John said something as they were walking back. "We should just build a prototype of this Stripe thing. It can't be that hard." Those words changed everything. They dropped out. Patrick from MIT, John from Harvard, both walking away from the most prestigious universities in the world. They flew to Buenos Aires, far from distractions, cheap to live in, good for coding around the clock. And for a month, they built. Here is the part the sanitized version of this story usually skips. They had no banking infrastructure, no payment license, no merchant account system of their own. What they had was a friend who worked at an existing payment gateway company, a company with a horrible API. So Patrick and John did something clever. They wrote a clean wrapper around that existing API. They abstracted all the complexity, and they reduced the entire integration to 7 lines of code. 7. Not 7 weeks of paperwork. Not 7 API endpoints. 7 lines that any developer could copy, paste, and run in under 60 seconds. The product was called /dev/payments. The landing page had no real pricing, just the words, "We're finalizing our pricing. We'll be competitive." The analytics screenshot on the homepage, borrowed from a plain mailing list Patrick subscribed to. It had nothing to do with Stripe. This is how scrappy it actually was. But the core insight was real. Make it so simple, a developer could integrate payments before finishing their morning coffee. They applied to Y Combinator in late 2009, got in. received funding of $20,000 to $30,000 by January 2010. And here is where the story shifts. Most founders at YC would send a link. Hey, want to try our beta? Great, we'll email you the link. Patrick and John did not do that. When someone agreed to try Stripe, the brothers had one response. Right then, give me your laptop. And they would set it up on the spot. Immediately, in front of the person. Paul Graham, the legendary co-founder of Y Combinator, later named this technique the Collison installation. It became so iconic, it is now taught to every YC founder who comes through the program. Their first customers were all YC companies. Founders who were about to start charging for their software. Founders who were running out of money. Founders who desperately needed a payment solution that actually worked. Word spread fast, not through cold emails, not through sales decks, through conversations, through Hacker News posts, through developer forums, through one founder showing another founder the 7 lines. Patrick later described this moment. Initially, it very much spread through a word-of-mouth process. That was surprising to us, because it's a payment system, not a social network. You wouldn't think it would have any virality whatsoever. But it did, because the product was genuinely different. Not marginally better, categorically better. But not every day felt like momentum. There was a specific moment, early in Stripe's life, that Patrick has spoken about publicly. A moment of vertigo. He looked at everything ahead of them. The broken infrastructure that still needed to be built. The banks they still needed to convince. The regulatory maze they still needed to navigate. The customers they still needed to trust them with real money. And he told John, there's no point in doing this. He almost quit. The weight of the vision was crushing. The gap between what existed and what they wanted to build felt impossible. Patrick later reflected on what that experience taught him. When you are a creative person, you remain in a strange psychological space. You are both optimistic and pessimistic. If you're not optimistic, why are you creating things? If you're not pessimistic, you'll stop looking for the problems you still have to fix. He stayed. John stayed. They kept building. 7 lines of code got developers excited. But developers do not control budgets. They do not sign contracts. They do not approve vendors. For Stripe to grow beyond early-stage startups, it needed to solve a different problem. Trust. Payments are not like other software categories. If your collaboration tool goes down, your team is frustrated. If your payment processor fails, your revenue stops. Immediately. Enterprise teams knew this. Risk managers knew this. And Stripe was an unknown startup run by 2 Irish college dropouts. The resistance was real. Companies hesitated. Banks were reluctant to cooperate. Regulations required relationships that took months to build. This is when they hired Billy Alvarado, a business development operator with the banking relationships they lacked, someone who could walk into Wells Fargo and speak the language of the financial system. He became one of Stripe's 5th or 6th employees. And slowly, methodically, the infrastructure that made Stripe real began to take shape. Clean documentation, predictable behavior, transparent pricing, no fees for failed transactions, no surprise charges. We only make money when you make money. Developers began trusting Stripe. Then startups began trusting Stripe. Then fast-growing companies followed. Here is the moment almost nobody talks about correctly. Stripe did not go to enterprise. Enterprise came to Stripe. Shopify integrated Stripe. Lyft integrated Stripe. Instacart integrated Stripe. Amazon, Facebook, Ford. These were not sales wins. They were inevitabilities. Because by the time enterprise leadership began evaluating payment processors, the conversation had already been decided. Somewhere in their organization, a developer had already used Stripe. A team had already built on it. The documentation was already in their internal wikis. The integration was already in their code base. Switching away would not just be inconvenient. It would mean rewriting existing infrastructure, retraining engineering teams, creating new failure points. Patrick later described this inflection point. At some point, there was a very noticeable change in how Stripe felt. It tipped from being this boulder we had to push to being a train car that had its own momentum. Stripe had not won the executive first. It had won the builder first. And the builder had won the executive for them. Let us stop here for a moment. Because most people tell this story as a technology story. It is not. 7 lines of code was not an engineering decision. It was a sales strategy. The most elegant sales strategy in the history of B2B software. Every competitor was trying to win business through persuasion. Sales calls, contract negotiations, executive relationship building. Stripe made persuasion unnecessary. If your product is hard to adopt, you have to convince people. If your product is impossible not to adopt, you don't. Stripe designed adoption to be so frictionless that it spread before anyone had a chance to reject it. By the time a decision maker asked, "Should we use Stripe?" the answer was already yes. The 7 lines were not just code. They were a distribution mechanism. They were a competitive moat. They were proof that the easiest product to adopt is the hardest product to displace. By 2011, Stripe launched publicly, a team of 10 people, roughly 100 customers, $2 million in seed funding, including checks from PayPal co-founders Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. The very platform that had dominated online payments was now funding its replacement. By 2019, Stripe was valued at $35 billion. By 2021, $95 billion. In 2024, businesses using Stripe processed $1.4 trillion in payments, a 38% increase from the prior year. Stripe now supports half of the Fortune 100, 80% of the Forbes Cloud 100, 78% of the Forbes AI 50. The GDP of the Internet, Patrick's original mission, has grown from 2% of global consumer spending to more than 20%. From a Buenos Aires apartment, from 7 lines of code. From 2 brothers who had no idea how the financial system worked, but knew exactly how bad the experience felt. Stripe did not win because of technology. PayPal had technology. Banks had technology. Stripe won because Patrick Collison had lived experience. He had felt the friction personally. He had coded around broken AP is. He had wasted time on documentation that assumed you already knew the answer. That lived knowledge of exactly where the pain was became the product. Artificial intelligence can automate outreach. It can generate messaging. It can simulate persuasion. But it cannot replicate the judgment that comes from having been there. It cannot tell you which friction is real and which is imagined. The people who change industries are not always the ones with the best technology. They are the ones who understand the experience of the people they are building for. Better than anyone. More personally, more viscerally. Patrick Collison grew up without internet access in rural Ireland. He taught himself to code. He sold a company at 19. He built the experience of every frustrated developer, including himself, into 7 lines. And those 7 lines became one of the most valuable private companies in history. The experience gap is real. The question is whether you are closing it or waiting for someone else to. Do not wait years to build this expertise. Subscribe to Close the Gap. Our weekly newsletter where real experiences from world-class experts become your competitive edge. Link in the description.